Preparing. All right, today is September 27th, 2020, and we're continuing our discussion on Desiderata Extinctionati, and we're finishing off today with the final rule, commandment, the ripeness is all. So again, let's leave it up to anyone who wants to start the discussion on this one.
Does anybody else?
Can I throw something in? You want to say something first, Hugh, or I just?
No, I said just. Does anybody else apart from me want?
Yeah. All right. Oh no. Well, there's several places we could start. I just went back to the original Desiderata, where there's a line that says, "And whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should." And I was just connecting that back with what you quoted from Edgar in King Lear at the end of your video on your video, the ripeness is all, and it's when Edgar says, "What ill thoughts again? Men must endure their going hence, even as they're coming hither. Ripeness is all." And I just thought there was a connection between the two things, because if you accept that the universe is unfolding as it should, then you're in a better position to be accepting the universe going hence and coming hither without sort of getting into a tiz about it. Does that lead you anywhere? I just thought it might have been a starting point.
No, that's quite good. The coming hence and going hither means being born and dying. So it's kind of an acceptance of birth and death, which is...
See, I interpreted that as being the fortunes of life, going this way or going that way. Is that valid, or do you think it definitely refers to death and life?
I always thought it was death and life. So coming hence means, coming here into this world, and going thither means going to where we know not, basically when we die. So birth and death are painful, and the middle can be too. But making sense out of your birth and death is what ripeness is all about.
Okay.
If you die lamenting your death and trying not to die, it's kind of dying unripe, and dying cynical and jaded is dying overripe. So somewhere in the middle, there's a kind of a sweet spot where the play of life unfolds. It's very much a thespian way of looking at life. It's very much related to Shakespeare's idea about the stage, and all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. And so, coming onto the stage and leaving the stage is what we all know. And then you say, well, if that's a stage in the universe just hanging in space, and we just make an appearance and then disappear on the world stage, what's the point? And the point is to put on a decent performance, which is what any playwright or actor would have known and done. So people forget that we end up results and achieving something in the play, that we forget to just make it a good act, make it a good performance. So I get all the time, the thing with the death strike. Oh, but it won't work. Oh, it's like, it doesn't matter whether it works or not. You do it for the fact that you're an actor in the play and you play your part. You don't do it because everybody seems to not want to lift a finger unless you can guarantee that something's going to work. So it's like, don't do that bit of activism, and well, do this bit of activism. Is it based on whether it works or not? It's like, look, we're screwed. You can do whatever you like. You're still going to die. So, get over it. Just do what's right and appropriate. So then, you have the flip side of that, which is an extreme of limitations on what you can do in terms of a performance. So particularly the non-violence thing. So now some idiot, so some moron or brigade has made a thing on XR Med about they flag everything non-violent. So they report me relentlessly reporting me for violence, and they're saying the sub is violent, it's promoting violence, and it's like just making a religion out of non-violence as well, saying that that's the only performance you can do is, you've got to play this straight and non-violent. And say like, no, you come on the world stage, you're free to act however you like. It's not up to you and your little busybody, whatever your, predilections are in terms of violence and non-violence. Is, go fuck yourself. I'll decide whether I'm going to rebel against extinction. You don't get to tell me off for it. But that's where we're at. Is basically people put guardrails on the performance that you can do, and then also rate everything in terms of its efficacy, whether it's achieves a result. But the ripeness is saying, there's a play, you can play it however you want. That's the rule. The rule is that you get to play it however you like. I mean, you can't lay the stage out or write the script. You have to accept what is happening around you. But in that context, you can think and do whatever you like. And that's the essence of freedom. But there are millions of people that don't want you to be free. They want you to have their rules and base everything on a utilitarian outcome. So everything has to be, will it work, won't it work, and stuff. And I'm saying that there's something more important than will it work, and what is how you play your cards, how you play the game, how you actually act on the world stage.
So you could see their rules as being another form of violence. They want to constrain you.
Yeah, it's a devious thing because they want to win by tying your hands. So they using a double bind argument, saying I'm going to slowly suffocate you, but you have to hold still. Because violence is wrong. And so if you did anything about me suffocating you, you'd be the violent one. And then you say, well, hang on a minute, you're suffocating me. And then they all like, oh, no, that's your interpretation, and try and make it, personalize it to say that, you've got it wrong. Everybody else has the best intentions towards it, but capitalists don't. No lives matter, and we're driven to extinction by a very few 1%. So this comfy liberal idea that everything is rather cozy, and it's just like your grade school teacher told you about, and everybody cares about you, and it's like, no, they don't. They're all lying, but nobody wants to see that, because then they say, oh, that's a psychopathic way of looking at the world. It's sociopathic, and say, well, it is a sociopathic world. That's why animals are going extinct. Yeah. That's why we have the military-industrial society,
but
that's why we have these genocides and this structural violence.
But that's what I was going, when I was listening to you saying that the performance has to go ahead regardless, and that that's what's important to have. I think we can't disregard the natural world in the performance too, because we're taking a human-centered point of view there on the conversation, and saying what the outcome is not so important. You can still play around with taking into the performance everything around you, not just the human part. I mean, I find it's a bit limiting to just reduce that to a human performance. The natural world, our place, is as or more important to help at the moment and to work on and to be an activist about. And I think they can be outcomes. They can be violent or non-violent, but they can be actions that make the performance even better and bigger if we take all this into consideration.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So the rightness of all is very solipsistic in a way. It's nature seems to have its own plan, and there's some algorithm that's unfolding in the world and evolution, and it seems to have its own rules and be kind of algorithmic. But so we have to fit into those rules. We can't really steer the outcome in nature. So in other words, even we have an exaggerated, what I'm proposing is that we have an exaggerated sense of control, or our left brain does certainly. And we think we can, do stuff about climate change and change this and do that. And it's like, no, we can't. The very act of changing it would have its own consequences. So there is kind of a Greek tragedy aspect to it. If you say like Oedipus it's a Greek tragedy because you take road A to avoid your fate, and you meet it on road B, where you rather you avoid road A because you know what your fate is there, and you take road B to avoid that fate, and you wind up meeting your fate on road B. It's the road to Samara, right? That thing I just wrote about recently, Somerset Maugham, and it's an old Babylonian tale. Is basically you're screwed if you do this or that. So it's kind of the same with climate change. It's basically we've done all this industrial society and stuff, and then we say, well, now we're going to correct it. We're going to fix the problem. But fixing the problem is, solar panels and wind farms, and they pretty soon have their own consequences that are as bad, land use and things like that is bad. So you're kind of damned if you do, if you're damned if you don't. So then you just say, well, you reach a point of nihilism, and you say, well, it doesn't matter what you do, you're kind of screwed. And then you get back to, but particularly things like ataraxia, you're screwed. Still go ahead in spite of it, and that's what makes the debate great. Does that make sense? You see, the idea that we can actually affect the world and have a good outcome is kind of unripe. The ripeness is knowing that you're screwed either way. So it's basically enduring your coming hence and going hither is, you can only enjoy your going hither if you know that you're screwed. There's nothing you can really do. You can. It's a conceit to say, you can care for nature and stuff. There's not anything we can really do to nature in terms of protecting it or changing it. And then, if that's the case, then you say, well, what's it all about? And it's knowing that and still doing it. So in other words, you still try and save the whale, knowing that you can't, because it's the right thing to do. It's not, see, millions of people now, they don't want to save the whale, or because they're like, oh, it's useless. And because they're thinking in terms of utilitarian outcome. So they're dying overripe. They're all these teenagers now that are overripe. They all, they don't have a sense of just doing what's the right thing. Is people are killing the whales, kill those fucks. But people say like, oh no, you're not allowed to kill those fucks. You got to, raise a banner, do something for the whales and stuff. And it's like, it's a mess. You just want to cut through to the chase and say, what's the right thing to do with a psychopath? Is shoot them. Yeah, and that's, it's a kind of a heroic way of looking and playing the part. But it's Oedipus. Oedipus knows that he can't win, but it's like saying, oh, I can't win against Hitler, so therefore I'm just going to roll over and go to the gas chambers or something. You say, no, you fight because it's not because you're going to win against Hitler, because that's the right thing to do. And that's what people are missing. So if you know you're doomed and you have a lost cause, and you die like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in a hail of bullets in a lost cause, then you're dying with complete ataraxia, just a clear mind, and ripe. Does any of that make any sense at all?
Yeah, it does. It does. It doesn't. It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't exactly answer what I was saying, but I get what you're saying. Maybe I didn't express myself very well. I think when you see direct action, for example, I don't know, you blow up a few bulldozers and you sabotage a logging company, and you see trees that survive thanks to what you've done. You know, that's the sort of thing. I don't know, I'm just giving an example out of literature, but that's what I'm saying about the performance. What the outcome we've talked about in the first point or the second point, we've talked about the journey. We don't mind about the outcome. I got that, but I'm thinking that this performance is this in between the coming on the stage and the leaving the stage can leave an imprint, even if it's desperate, but it can leave an imprint, a little one.
The idea is very Zen for the ripeness is all. So it's really somewhere in there is that you can't leave any impression. So even if you saved a few trees, it's like, yeah, you saved a few trees, but those trees are going to die anyway. I mean, they're not going to live forever. But you still do it as right action. So we've lost the concept of right action. We have a consequentialist view now. You only do something because of, it's a pure capitalism. You only do something for profit. So then people say, well, why do you want to do this? How is that going to help? What's that going to profit you? Why is that constructive? And say, forget the narrative of being constructive. It's basically, you blow up a bulldozer because it's basically wiping out the trees. You don't do it to say, well, I made a difference. So I don't give a crap whether I made a difference. The difference is that I played my part and then died ripe. So the emphasis is basically, the idea is that it's just a movie screen, and the world and the stage itself isn't any more affected by all the carnage that you project on it in a movie than a movie screen is. It's basically a magic lantern show, and we get all caught up in the moving image on that screen. But the whole screen, the universe, is eventually going away. So then you have to say, well, what's the point of this movie? You see, I continually come up against people that say, that don't understand doomerism. They're thinking, they doom us. They actually doom us in their heart of hearts. They don't believe we can actually survive much longer as a species. But they won't admit it. Well, they will after a few glasses of wine when you warm them down a bit. But in general, when they watch the news or when they hear bad news about the weather or something like that, then they will come back and they will take on this non-doomer stance that there is hope and there is, and then if you call them on this point, then they say, well, if you're a doomer, what's the point? Why don't you just kill yourself now? And you say, like, why? What would that do? What's the point of that? It's a poor show. So then basically I appeared on the stage. I went, oh shit, I don't like the way this plays, and killed myself. It's like, what kind of a player would you be? You would be dying unripe. And so just recently, somebody who you all know, in fact, said to me, but why are you even here then? What? And he said, like, meaning on the stage, why don't you just kill yourself, in other words, if you don't think we can survive? And so like, but we all know we can't survive. We all know we're going to die one day. So basically I say everybody has to be somewhere, so I'm here. it's a very odd thing that basically people have to get some profit out of. But any profit you make is gone too. It's basically that's what A Christmas Carol is about, and Scrooge, is that, you know, no matter how much he accumulates, he just becomes the richest person in the cemetery. But people can watch, you know, A Christmas Carol, and the very next day, or even before the movie's even finished, they saying, you know, well, why do that? What's the profit in it? There's no profit in anything. And that's the point of Dying Right 2, is realizing there is no profit or point in anything. But that doesn't mean, oh, well, then you might as well kill yourself. No, the opposite. It means then you must make a good performance, because that's all there is. All there is the movie, so make it a good movie. That's part of what the Ripeness is saying.
You reminded me of something to do with suicide, in what you were just saying about the doomers oscillating between nihilism and hope. I was having a discussion with a friend of mine who was suicidal, and I thought there were two ways of looking at it. That if you were willing to die, then it kind of indicated that nothing really mattered to you anymore in the ego sense. And so if nothing really mattered anymore, that would be a good time to stick around instead of going. And then the other aspect was another reason why a person might be suiciding is just because existence become too painful for them, and it was just a matter of escaping pain. I'm just trying to assemble that in my mind.
So
that there's
again, it comes back to. Sorry, I thought you were finished. Go ahead.
No, it's all right. Go ahead if you've got a response, because I wasn't sure if I was very clear. That's all.
Again, it comes down to ego. It always comes down to ego and the ego boundaries. So when you say, like, when you talk about suicidal ideation, you say, who's committing suicide? It's basically, well, it's not your mammalian brain. Your mammalian brain would never do it. Your primate brain would never. Basically, chimps don't commit suicide. In fact, no part of your brain except your alien cortex and the seat of your ego wants to commit suicide. I told you in one of I think the second video I put out about the Piraha people, and how Everett went to translate the language of the Piraha so that basically he could tell them about Christianity. And he got converted to their atheism because during one of these episodes, which Christians call witnessing, what missionaries do is they try and suck you in with this personal story about how they converted to Christianity and became born-again Christians. And it was from this painful experience. So the painful experience was his stepmother committed suicide. So he told the Piraha this story and shared his pain with them. And then he's saying, well, I have pain relief from my Christianity. He was absolutely floored because they all burst out laughing when they heard the story. And he said, why are you laughing? And they said, Piraha don't kill themselves. The thought, they can easily imagine killing somebody else. If somebody is an arsehole, they'll kill him. But killing yourself, it just couldn't, and they couldn't conceive of how somebody, it seems so absurd that, you know, you're in the struggle for life, sure, but to actually turn on yourself it seemed like the funniest thing they'd ever heard. And so why? The reason is because they don't have an ego. They very anti the alien cortex. So they don't have this personal little me feeling pain and is feeling, well, I'm in this or out of this, and I can't take anymore, so I'm going to kill myself. That little me is saying, you know, here's my little existence and my tiny little perspective. And that's ego. So you fight your little corner, and you fight and fight and fight from a position of ego as, jockeying against other egos. At some stage, you reach ego fatigue. Then your ego says, I can't fight my little corner anymore. And then says, okay, I'm going to give up the ghost. And then, so that's what it's really doing when it's considering ego. It's considering, do I close this little box? Now, in the liberation traditions like Zen Buddhism and all the esoteric traditions, the Hinduism and anything that will teach you enlightenment, is playing with this idea of ego. It's saying is, why are you this, or is it even correct that you are this person, or if you are this me? Why aren't you part of nature? Why aren't you part of the universe? Why aren't you part of the play? Stuff that endures much longer than a person. I mean, all your molecules and stuff, they're not going anywhere. They're kind of assembled to make you. All your cells regenerate. You have about, the vast majority of your cells are microbiota. And in a lot of respects, you're just a basically vehicle for, about 100 million microbiota, about 10 times as many cells as you have in your body. And those microbiota are just using you and directing you. Now they understand that they're putting out neurotransmitters and hormones and chemicals to make you do all. They're controlling you like a puppet. So really, you are just a vehicle for them to drive around, a bunch of, basically bacteria to drive around in. So if you say, well, I'm going to commit, say like, well, what the fuck about the microbiota? What are they going to do? They might die because, you might not get buried. You might get incinerated. That's 100 million organisms. No, much more than that. I think virtually 1 trillion organisms. You had a selfish little view of like, I'm the, imagine if your car did that. If your car said like, I'm sick of, ferrying all these people around. I'm going to go into a brick wall because I can't take this, traffic jam anymore. It's absurd. But that's how we are. And the reason is because we are working from ego.
I was listening to what you were saying, and it brought to my mind the kind of recent consensus that's happening in medical professions and about mental health, because Gary was talking about suicide and you were talking about this laugh in the Pera people. And there's more and more a consensus that mental illness is completely a cultural construct anyway. So like, for example, possession by a demon is normal in Africa in a lot of places, and here it's considered like schizophrenia or other type of psychiatric, or I don't know, there's so many things of the past. Witches, for example, were burnt a long time ago, and I don't know, this anyway, the consensus now is that the concept of suicide and of mental health and mental health issues in general is completely attached to what you call the alien cortex constructs, which are cultures based on an ego, based on an identification to a model. I am a Christian, I am a this, I am a that. So yes, it's exactly, it's fascinating to look at the I don't know if you've lived in Africa, Hugh. You grow up there, and you see all the practices that are done. The people who are possessed, what they call possessed, which I mean, and they've been trying to analyze this from our point of view here in the West. Like they've tried to put names on mental illnesses, basing themselves on neurotransmitters that are abnormal, instead of saying, well, we just observed neurotransmitters that were abnormal when people were having an episode. But in Africa, they directly, when some places, they directly addressed that situation. Okay, that person is possessed. It means something. We're going there. We're not going to analyze. It is. So as to come back to suicide, it's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same consideration. Where is the most suicide? Where are the suicides? They're in the West, most of them, except from a few traditional.
It's utterly bizarre from every point of view in biology for an animal to kill itself. It's abhorrent to nature for an animal to kill it. the fact that people are doing it and people think it's kind of normal and medicated and that, basically it's a 1,000 fire alarm, a 1,000-bell fire alarm that people are committing suicide in our society. The fact that it's normalized is just bizarre beyond belief. But what is happening is we do really, you mentioned having a demon, we have a demon inside us. The alien cortex is a little nexus that sees itself as an identity. If I say something to somebody on, basically it forms a little cluster. It often gets entrenched in some little identity like veganism or blackness or some identity politics, and then it goes off on this thing, and I'm black, and you say, like, really, which part of you is black? If I turn that black bit white, then are you no longer a person anymore? It's bizarre crap that forms an identity. It's just, if you pick it apart, it all turns to shit. That's why I like telling people, I'm an African American. I love telling black people in America, I'm an African American, because it does their head in. Because, hey, I'm born in Africa. They haven't even been to Africa. They haven't got a fucking clue about anything that goes on in Africa. I'm more black than they are, but I'm white as hell. So it does the head in. But I like to do it because, just hang on, I like to do it because I'm breaking down the ego.
Yeah,
now,
the whole thing.
More from Africa. So in Africa, this is a very Western conception. What you're saying, Sophie, is basically this idea of individualism that we have. It basically comes from Stuart Mills and from Locke. It's basically liberalism, and it's entrenched idea that there is an I, I'm a me. You give somebody a label, you give them a name. You basically, if they go into the military, you stick the name over here. You give them a rank. So this ranking and labeling and stuff in our society is very unusual. It's very unusual in our history. Even chimps that have a hierarchical kind of tribal life, which we got away from in the troop. Humans distance themselves a lot in hunter-gatherer societies from that chimp environment. But in Africa, they have a very fluid sense of ego. So although if I throw a stone at somebody, they'll say, ouch, I'm not exactly, I'm throwing a stone at an individual and they will respond as an individual. They don't think of me in that way unless they've been exposed, to Western education. So they I'm not throwing a stone at a village just because I'm throwing a stone at a villager. But their idea of an ego is much more fluid. They might most of the time think of themselves as a village. So, for example, you're talking about mental health. So now that mental health, of course, people go a bit bonkers, but the African interpretation is often in terms of things like the ancestors. So one of the particular things is they'll interpret it as the ancestors have withdrawn the protection. So you cut off from the ancestors. In a way, they're saying, oh, you're becoming an individual. You're losing touch with the tribe, with the ancestors, with nature. And then they would consider you sick. So we're all sick from, the Pirahak call us apagache. It means crooked head. They think we're all sick. All white people are sick. And I agree. But just raise that as their idea of identity is very fluid, and that's kind of shocking to a Western person because we're so entrenched in our view of an ego and an ego boundary and an identity. It comes as a shock that it's store-bought. I mean, literally store-bought in some cases. When they give you, advertising is saying, get a new identity, reinvent yourself and stuff like that. It's like, you imagine an African trying to reinvent themselves. It's like, what? Go to the next village and become Swahili? I mean, how do you reinvent yourself? It's ridiculous. But Americans take it as an icon of, I can move towns, I can get a new job, I can reinvent myself, I can get a new credit rating. It's absurd, absolutely absurd. And then people wonder, well, why do they kill themselves? Well, because you told them what their self was. So once you put a little ring around them, you made that magic circle, and they see everything in terms of that magic circle. And then even the environment, even now when they're doing climate change, it's like, my future, and then, Fridays for future. Well, Whose future? It's me, my future. They don't. Fridays for Future is only talking about the whale in terms of it makes me sad to see whales die. Not for the fucking whale. They've never seen a whale. They don't know what the fuck a whale is. They've just seen it on with David Attenborough and Blue Planet. So what they're saying is me gets hurt. Me gets hurt when I see whale die. Therefore, me wants you to do something, you know, and then you talk to the government as if it's a parent.
That's
So
the false language. Yeah, but it's the false use of empathy. It's pervasive in the modern language of being involved in causes, and it's completely misplaced, because empathy is about you. It's not about feel what the other person. You know, it's used and misused all the time in all these circles. It's terrible, and that's another ego thing. It's just completely. Oh, it's revolting. It's absolutely revolting.
Have you heard that story?
Empathy is your reaction to a suffering in someone else. It's not feeling. It doesn't exist. There's no support for that. It's your reaction to what is happening. So all that they're calling empathy and these groups of circles of, it's purely an ego thing. It has nothing to do with the natural world. Nothing. It has to do with personal emotions, personal reactions, ego again, and it's completely gone the wrong way. Completely gone the wrong way.
I got to say something here, and that's what our alien cortex does is subversion or rather substitution and inversion. So that empathy is not real empathy. It's really a substitute for empathy. Now, this is what I mean. If real empathy is if somebody's, you know, hacking a dolphin to death, and you run into the water and get a meat cleaver and stick it through the guy's head and say, stop that. That's empathy. Empathy is not where you imagine the whale. When you give money to Sea Shepherd or to Greenpeace to save the whale, that's a substitution. That's an idea. There's no whale. What you're responding to is something manufactured by advertisers and people that are, you know, thought up what's going to pull your heartstrings, and then they made an advertising campaign based on that. They've substituted pictures and a campaign for actual whales. So basically, we would be far better off if people did have empathy. But we don't allow them empathy, because what it would mean is if I saw anybody being cruel to a whale, I would just fucking kill them on the spot. Well, no one would be cruel to whales if everyone did that. The problem is that we have we substitute a law saying, you know, well, we have the law. You can't take the law into your own hands. So, you know, you can't go and, you know, the Japanese now are slaughtering dolphins, and, you know, they're going to slaughter a whole lot of sharks now to make a vaccine for COVID-19. Right? Now, if you go along there and if you saw this happening and rammed them with your boat or shot them or did something like that spontaneously, that would be in France, be crime de passionnel. You have a sort of defense in France because they're not completely divorced from a real passion. But in Britain, they would put you in the gallows for that, because basically they're saying, you know, you cannot take the law into your own hands. I'm saying, why? It would work much better if basically people took the law into their own hands spontaneously. Because it goes both ways. You know, basically if you were a nutcase and you ran around killing people, then, you know, other people have the same right. So they can also do it. So it's this idea that you need to substitute a government for your personal responsibility. Then they have the right to exercise violence, and they have the right to exercise the law. And then basically that's the substitution. And then this persistent inversion, it always gets put up, you know, upside down. So that then basically if you responded to the killing of the whales spontaneously like that, then it's inverted. It's your problem. So we have structural violence going on all the time, but that's not called violence. That's basically called law and order. But if you react against it, there's something wrong with you. You need to be medicated. You need to be put in a cell. Basically, you have to personalize that. If you're going against this violent system, then it's your problem. So it's an inverted thing again. So it's always inversion and substitution. I just wanted to add that. Sorry, Gary, I interrupted you.
I was thinking about a kind of immaturity in that human beings, they feel safe when they're young and they've got their parents to look after them. And then when they get to be grown up and they realize that there's nobody bigger than them to look after them, so they invent their leaders and invent their god as their kind of big daddy to give them a sense of being protected. Yeah, I'm just wondering if that's part of the, what you see now, where here there's been, they're saying, well, the Prime Minister's never been so popular as he is now since the virus situation, because he's, everybody's looking to them, the Prime Minister and the government, and they're helping us and they're looking after us and getting everything going properly so that the virus won't get us. And it's like Big Daddy protecting you from the bogeyman in the middle of the night, So in a sense, the sort of response that people exhibit is could you say that's just an immaturity? I don't know. Is that could it be put that way?
Yes, it is. But here's the thing: you said that it was, people make the government into their daddy or something like that, but they don't. It's ready-made. You see, the psychopaths take on that role, and so you don't have to do anything. You're born into a role of being a child of the state, and the state works overtime to keep you infantile. Now, this is all part of slavery. But, you see, people like Aristotle said that slavery is justified because some people have the temperament of a slave. Now, that might be kind of confusing to Western liberals, but I'll tell you, as a pseudo slave owner or the child of slave owner in South Africa, growing up, we had wage slaves, so they were as good as slaves. I understand the slave mentality very well, and I can explain it to people. But part of slavery is convincing the slave to adopt an infantile role. So this is lost in a lot of the Hollywood recreations. You get, that you have these strong characters that are being whipped and stuff like that, and it's completely false narrative. Slaves are not strong characters that are being kept down by the whip. They exactly like liberals. They're infantile characters that know there's a whip somewhere. I tell you that on slave plantations, the whip never comes out. If it did, it would be legendary, and there would be wildfire all over the thing, basically. But they would only take it out if there was an exceptional person, basically somebody that wasn't infantile. Then they would resort to the whip. But the whip wasn't used every day. Basically, it was an exceptional, because everybody was a kid that knew where the whip was kept and what cupboard and what circumstance the boss would take it out. So it's all, for slaves to get whipped every day, like in a Hollywood movie, then it would mean that the slaves never knew the boundaries. They would never knew how to react. They would just continually be crossing red lines and then getting whipped for it. But that's completely misunderstood. It is that the slave understands minutely where the boundaries are. All these things and articles of oppression and violence are exactly the same as liberals today. Every liberal knows exactly where the boundaries are. So I would basically, I'm going to have to make a confession here. I would sometimes torture my kids by just stepping on the grass where they do step on the grass. And I'd go, hey, kids, check, it says don't step on the grass. And I'm like, put my foot over it. And they go, oh, no, Dad, don't. And I said, look, I'm going to do it. There's nobody here. There's just some arsehole wrote a do not step on the grass sign. And he's not here. And anyway, who the hell, it's not his grass, and I can step where I want, and I'm going to do it, and then they would go, and you could see they were physically in pain. And I would stomp on the grass. And they would be like, I know from fMRI studies that they show that the pain center in people's brain is lighting up. They're whipping themselves. So seeing me transgress the rules is enough to cause my own kids pain in their pain centers. It's the same pain centers in the brain that actually feels physical pain. But the thing is, the reason why I would do it is because afterwards it's ridiculous. They can see that what I did was nothing. I walked on the fucking grass. It's God's own grass in God's own planet, on using God's own sunshine. It's basically, you can fucking walk on the grass. Not some guy puts a little thing there and writes some letters on it and suddenly he's the boss of you. Fuck off. So basically, afterwards, in retrospect, then they realized that I was right, that it's a ridiculous situation. And so then it breaks the rules a bit. They're a little bit more free. But it's an important thing. Like people like XR, movements like XR would be far better off showing people that you can break the rules with impunity. This is a it's a slave narrative. What Gandhi was teaching was slave reinforcement. There was learned helplessness. Basically, what Gandhi was saying is, you go up to these guys with sticks and let them beat you. And then you have a cracked skull, you might have brain damage, you have blood running down your tunic, and that's cool. Basically, he was reinforcing that the Brits are the boss, and the Brits can crack your head. And basically, the only weapon we have is we can reach their mammalian brain and they can have pity on us. It's a terrible slave narrative. Basically, there were millions of, there were 500 million, okay, there are a billion Indians now, but there were 500 million in 1947. There were about 5,000 Brits. They could have walked over, taken their jock straps and chucked them in the sea. But they didn't do it. Why? Because of the slave mentality. It's reinforced helplessness. So the system tries to inculcate a feeling of helplessness. And this is part of the danger of socialism, is basically it's saying, like, the state must take care of us, and say, yeah, but the libertarians have got a point, is that if you make mommy and daddy out of the state, if your mommy and daddy decide they want to castrate you, that's it. What you can say? You said that they have complete power over you. It's like, I don't think you should be doing this. Don't forget, Hitler was a socialist. Don't forget that. He was a national socialist, which kind of, you have global socialism, and global socialism is very different to national socialism. But socialism is really national socialism because when it comes down to it, it's the state. So people say, okay, the state is my mommy and daddy. Now, nobody made the social contract and Locke's social contract. We were born in it. I didn't sign a social contract. I would never have signed it. But they force it on you. Why? Because they're the slave owners. It's an important part of the narrative that they're protecting you. You see, that was an important part of our narrative in South Africa. We forced the childishness of slaves. Slaves were all very much bowing and scraping and Effendi, yes, Effendi, no Effendi, because they realized, basically from birth that that's the best way to avoid trouble. So, that learned helplessness we pushed on them also came with this idea that basically we had a white man's burden. So yeah, my dad considered himself progressive, basically a very enlightened, went to the Sorbonne and was an English gentleman, and just the most decent, kindest, non-violent person you could possibly imagine. But he had a strong sense of the white man's burden, that he would, do the best for black people in Africa, not realizing that reinforces the slave narrative. What he should have been doing is, making sure they were free. But nobody wants anybody else to be free. We love the slave system, and that's the problem. But part of the ripeness, if you die as a slave, you're dying unripe. Part of the ripeness is to basically transcend slavery. You know, who wants to, if I do a movie, a Hollywood script, and I say, oh, this is the story. It's about a guy called Hugh that's born a slave. He has a miserable life, but he obeys all the rules, and he dies a slave. What do you think? Well, that's the crappiest screenplay I've ever heard. Well, that's the screenplay every liberal is playing. It's miserable theater. They're dying green.
So this is in a way then the predicament that humanity and the planet are facing at the moment is the big opportunity to crack out of that kind of. This is forcing everything to such a fever pitch of crisis.
Yeah, and
there
this
might
is
be a
why it's
chance
the
to
last
crack out
thing
of it.
on the Desiderata. This is why it's the
Yeah.
most important and last thing on the
Yeah.
Desiderata, because everybody now is going to reach a point of enlightenment. The problem is,
if
for
I
at
can-
least 7 billion people, it's going to be a deathbed enlightenment. So it's
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask about. Just to go back to suicide for just a moment, is that, in a sense, it, if you're suiciding because everything's fucked and it doesn't matter anymore, you're kind of missing your opportunity. Because if it doesn't matter to such a degree that you're willing to throw it all away, then at that same point, you're also kind of liberated from everything. So you're right, potentially on the cusp of being free, and then you're going to snuff it. So it's kind of like you could see that collective suicide that we're heading for at the moment, or individual suicide, is a missed opportunity to wake up. Is that sound like a valid way to put it?
Yeah, that's a very valid point. So the movie Groundhog Day was really about that. Is if you wake up and there's a complete reset and you live the same day, there are no consequences, right? Whatever you do, you can actually live out the day and die and do whatever, rob a bank, you're just going to wake up on the same morning and do a do-over. Now, not a lot of people know it. That movie was written by a Zen Buddhist. And what it's really about is really your life is like a day, and all your reincarnations are just a new day. Well, you can do whatever you freaking want, because the next incarnation, you're a new individual. So you have a new identity, and there's no follow-up. They're not so big on karma like they are in India. Now, karma also was a little attachment that the slave owners put on basically the castes, because they're saying like, well, because they realized they could justify slave narrative in Hinduism. Like, Hindus are really going to blow their top when I say this, but it's true. The caste system that the Brahmins imposed, the Aryans imposed when they arrived in India, was basically to say that the lower castes, they had it crap. So then, Christianity says, oh, well, you have it crap now, but you'll get your reward in heaven. Well, they had another get out, and they said, well, no, you have another birth, so you keep on being reborn, and things will get better based on, your piety and karma, basically good deeds that you do. You get a better and better birth, and you'll move up the caste system based on a number of births. Both of them complete bullshit, but a great narrative for slaves, right? The thing about the reset and Groundhog Day, and where you're reborn every day, was that this. If you realize that it's futile, that it really is just another birth each day, then, as you say, then you are free. So that is a kind of rightness. Now, there's something deeper in the movie, in Groundhog Day, because if you remember the movie, he breaks out of the continual Groundhog Day, repeating the day after day, by love. He basically learns love. And now I'm violating this previous commandment number 10 by talking cheaply about love. But he learns love through that, because with total freedom, he exhausts all avenues. Basically, he gets everything out of his system that's that he possibly could. You know, whatever he wants, every whim he's tried is, you know, basically he exhausts. And finally, he reaches a stage of equanimity. And when he doesn't care anymore, then, you know, the girl stays the whole night and he wakes up and it's a new day. Now, that is ataraxia, because he doesn't care anymore. Right. That's he's exhausted all avenues. Everything is done. And that is true love. It's not any big emotion. So, yeah, once or twice somebody said, like, you know, like oh, ataraxia, baby, and you know, it's like that's a complete opposite of what ataraxia is. Ataraxia is really exhaustion, like you've, you know, basically cried your eyes out, your lungs are not there anymore. You're just basically just empty, and then that's true love.
Yeah, you remind me. Yeah, I'm just reminded of a thing that Alan Watts said, that, you know, supposing you could go to sleep and, well, not so much go to sleep, but supposing you could have any life you wanted. And then at the end of that one, you could have the next one and the next one, and you could just keep picking whatever you wanted. And you could go on and on and on as long as you wanted to. And he said, you know, in the end, you know where you would be? You'd be in this room, sitting there, listening to me, just like you are now. You know, in other words, you'd come back to your sorry, I don't know how to finish it. You know, you just come back to the existence that you would have had anyway.
That's kind of a deep philosophical thing. It's basically, we kind of came in on this. Is the world, like Leibniz sought, the best of all possible worlds, and it will unfold as it is algorithmically, or do you have some input into it in free will? So it is a deep.
Oh no, I didn't really see it that way. I mean, I don't see. I don't know if it just sounds corny to say it, but if you're in tune with existence, your will is the same as the will of everything else. So the question of free will is it doesn't arise. It's like whatever's happening is what you're doing. So what role is a concept like will got? It's superfluous.
And again, we're back to who has this free will. If you
that's right.
If you're an
to have the
African,
will, you've got to have a separate entity.
If you have an ego boundary of, say, the tribe, then whatever you do as the tribe. So then basically, you know, if I come as a Westerner, you do everything for you. So, you know, if you go and like steal from somebody in the next village, then you're an individual, and, you know, if the next village comes over and complain, they'll single you out. But you have to imagine different ego boundary where you would be doing it as the village. Then the whole village would come over and remonstrate with the village. They could almost substitute, and in fact, they did. If you see a lot of things which now we say are misogynistic, against women, oppressive and stuff, because they substitute a woman. I mean, they did that in Babylonian times. It's like, if I steal your cow, then, you know, you can have my daughter. And you're like, well, doesn't the daughter have a say? No, it's basically, she wouldn't expect to have a say, because her ego boundary is the whole family or the tribe or whatever. So you can, you know, say like, okay, this person, you know, there's a lot of the guys in like Papua New Guinea. You murder somebody in the other tribe, they say, okay, well, you killed my daughter, now I want one of your kids. They would settle it that way. They would get a kid and give them, and it was all done. And you say, but how can that be settled? What about the poor bastard that would have to move to foster parents? Didn't they get a say? No, because they thought of it that way too. They thought, well, it's just part of the tribe. I'm the bit that they didn't have a problem with. It's very hard for us to understand now why they wouldn't have a problem, because we're so vested in our own egos. We can't imagine that there's other versions of an ego boundary. But I kind of went off from what you were saying there. Just remind me what you were saying. Gary, what was it? I'm kind of drifted off from. I didn't quite answer what you were saying. Did I?
No, it's okay. I couldn't hear anything you just said there for a moment. It blanked out. No, I guess that's all. I was just making the point. Well, yeah, you made the point. Was that the will, individual will, implied the ego. Sorry, I actually no, I can't get back to where I stepped off onto that point. Yeah, it was about the Groundhog Day and the idea that you've ended up with the existence that you've got.